everyone, Amer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm reviewing from the Revival, Season 2, Episode 9, which is called Banshee. So we start this one out in the Irish town of Ballynagra, where a group of elderly passengers are boarding a van for a picnic outing. And a man comes by with a box of beer bottles for them to enjoy on their trip or at the picnic, but he switches one of the bottles and has a bit of a sinister look as they leave. They sing happily as they head off, and the man, O'Rourke, meets with his boss, pub owner McCarran, expressing some regret about what they're doing. But McCarran says it's just good business, as the van contains Catholics as well as Protestants. And they watch from the roadside as the truck explodes, with their faces telling us all we need to know. Jim uses spy speak at a train yard to get the displayer this time. The mission. McCarran is using the Irish sectarian violence to sell weapons to both sides, and it's believed that he was behind the explosion. The IMF must expose him and put him out of business so that the battling sides can start talking about peace. The IMF set up shop at a lighthouse near the city and discussed that the main figures on both sides, Skelton and Carney, lost relatives in the explosion and are blaming the other side, of course. And it's hoped that the IMF plan can bring them together somehow, with some of the dirt worst cabbaging I have ever heard about what I understand is commonly referred to in Ireland as the Troubles, and why McCarran's plans are working to fan the sectarian flames. Shannon starts working at McCarran's pub as a waitress and singer, which allows Dane Badler to have a whole whackload of fun. Skelton and Carney both happen to be there and start jaw-jacking at each other, requiring O'Rourke to step in and tell them to stay on their side of the literal line in the pub, which separates Catholics from Protestants if they want to stay. McCarran takes Carney down to his basement to show him some of his new weapons, with Nicholas following them to have a look. Kearney apparently knows the dirty game McCarran's playing, but glumly accepts the weapons as he's told that Skelton's arming himself as well. Jim enters the pub with Max, telling the crowd that he'll accept bets if anyone's daring enough to try and win a fight against Max. Grant enters and says he'll accept the challenge, taking the throng outside the pub and working a fight to keep them busy, to allow Nicholas to get in and have a look at the arsenal, sabotaging the firing mechanisms of many of the weapons, and Shannon takes the opportunity to set some gadgets up around the pub. The action spills back into the building, and Jim tells Max to go down for the fight, which he does. Shannon chats up O'Rourke about the rumors of a coach of death that's been riding around every night, searching for the souls of the poor old folks from the van, and it's feared that the Banshee will come to take vengeance for them. Poor superstitious O'Rourke is scared absolutely witless at the news. Meanwhile, Jim chats up Grant for McCarran's benefit, and Grant spins the yarn of being a mercenary on the run who knows how to handle any weapon he gets his hands on. McCarran, of course, overhears by design and wants to know more. Jim says he's been an arms dealer all over the world, and McCarran wants to get in on the action. Grant says he doesn't want anything to do with it and heads away, with Max saying he'll follow him to make sure he stays quiet, but McCarran tells O'Rourke to go along as well to make sure. Surprising Jim and Max at that development, a chase ensues, with O'Rourke struggling to keep up with the younger men, of course, and at an appropriate point, Max pretends to shoot Grant, who falls to the ground in a ravine. O'Rourke says he's going to make sure Grant's really dead, and Max eggs him on, saying that it's bad luck to shoot a colored person, and go ahead, so that I'm not responsible. So, of course, O'Rourke begs off at that, tells Max to do it, which he does, firing a second errant shot so that Grant can get away. Jim inspects McCarran's sabotaged weapons, showing him that they're defective, and he's clearly not a careful or smart businessman. They have a meet in which Jim shows him some powerful submachine guns, and they have almost the same conversation that McCarran had with Carney earlier, with Jim offering McCarran some time to pay him or he'll go into business for himself. The IMF makes some preparations, getting some black horses and setting up some audio recordings, while that night O'Rourke whines to an indifferent McCarran about the things that have happened, which are sure to bring him bad luck. The IMF sets up for their spookery show, with Nicholas messing with the lights in the pub. The sounds of the old folks singing are heard. Holograms of Banshee Shannon follow O'Rourke around, making the pathetic man even more pathetic, as though that were even possible. McCarran finds him sniveling on the floor and demands that he gets a hold of himself. because nothing's going to stop him from keeping Jim's weapons, even if he has to take them by force or kill Jim to get them. Nicholas gets to Carney's farm and tells him about the new weapons that are now on the market, tells him to come to the lighthouse after sundown. Max tells Skelton the same. Shannon tells McCarran about the rumored deal, and he tells the antsy O'Rourke to be ready for the opportunity to take Jim out. Grant sabotages McCarran's car so that he and O'Rourke have to walk most of the way to the lighthouse. Carney and Skelton arrive separately and are taken out by IMF tranquilizer guns. Max and Nicholas shackle their left arms and left legs together around a table and show them a Rube Goldberg-esque device whereby the key for the shackles will fall to the table after a candle burns for 2 hours. They advise the battling firebrands to use those 2 hours to make peace with each other, but they can beat the hell out of each other if they choose, and Jim appears as the driver of the coach of death, advising them to choose the former. One gets no prizes as to which choice they make. After a while, they stop hitting each other and then just decide to stay quiet, while the IMF heads out to the nearby cemetery to lure the approaching McCarran and O'Rourke with the old folk song. And Banshee Shannon appears again. O'Rourke tells McCarran he's through with him to avoid the Banshee's wrath and runs off, but McCarran shoots him in the back and tries ineffectively to shoot the hologram, which advances on him and whose presence he cannot escape. Eventually, he tries to take refuge in a ruined church, begging for help and forgiveness, and Nicholas turns on a TV so that Carney and Skelton can watch as well. McCarran looks outside, seeing Banshee Shannon still there, and Jim arrives with the coach of death, saying it's McCarran's time to ride. McCarran confesses to setting up the explosion to sell the weapons and refuses to take the ride. Carney and Skelton realize the mayhem in which they have played a role and agree to confront McCarran together. Then maybe they'll talk. The coach picks Shannon up as the IMF ride away in a kind of lame and unnecessary scheme, but mission accomplished. I'm going to give this one a grade of a D-, kind of on that D/D- level, at which I put a lot of episodes which are just not really good. I watch them once for the purposes of, when I'm going through the series, when I have, a bit of a hunkering for it, or here where I'm doing my reviews. It's not one that I would go out of my way to go back and watch again. One good thing that I did like about this episode, even though it is hokey as hell, yes, absolutely it is. Jane Badler as the Banshee visually looks pretty good. I gotta give some kudos to the special effects guys. You can say that it's cheesy and hokey, like I said, and I'm not going to disagree with you that overall, for story purposes, yeah, it is. But visually, I think especially that shot when she first appears as a hologram near the pub window, that was really well done. I don't mind the effects too much from a visual standpoint, so I will point that out as something good. I also enjoyed the staged fight scene. It was lots of fun for me as, a little bit more than casual fan of professional wrestling, knowing some of the things that go on behind the scenes. Especially Grant in the middle saying, "Hey, what was that, buddy? You really hit me." And Max kind of potatoes him, as they say, and hits him with a real shot, for effect. So, that was kind of fun. Enjoyable action, I guess we could say. Let's give credit where credit is due. Moving on, though, to the stuff that's not really good at all. I would say that Peter Adams as Brian McCarran is, at best, he's kind of meh as a villain. He's really, really ordinary, and I can't really get myself, too interested in what happens to this guy. I don't know quite why, but I wouldn't put him right down in the category of I don't care at all what happens to him. He does have a little bit of charisma, I would say. He's not completely unengaging, but he's totally a lame schmuck. There's absolutely no question about that. Moving on to stuff that's also just bad. I did not like the stereotyping of Ireland. That's why I called it Ireland in the beginning, because it's really, over the top. And I know, of course, that this is not what Ireland is like. Don't kid yourself. There might as well have been pots of gold and leprechauns. We have this saying, oh, everybody's at the pub all the time. Everyone likes a good fight. Come on. Speaking of which, just as a side note, I don't have firsthand experience about the conflict in Ireland that was, taking place at the time. It went over several decades. I've heard some things, I've read some things. I noted just doing some research that there are still, things called peace walls in Northern Ireland, which probably are not used in the same way anymore, but were used to kind of separate, Catholic neighborhoods from Protestant neighborhoods. And I've heard, I don't know this for sure, that, the kind of lines within buildings that we saw to separate Catholics and Protestants in places like pubs and schools and factories and things like that, that those were real things that were actually in place to kind of try and keep the peace and literally kind of keep everybody on their side, so to speak. If we have any watchers or subscribers or fans from Ireland, I'd love to hear in the comments about confirmation one way or the other about these sorts of things for those who may remember such things. I'm interested in those sorts of little tidbits about history. Anyway, getting back to the episode. What's also really bad about this episode, the horrible cabbaging and dialogue that is part of this episode. I mean, just when I think it kind of can't get any worse, well, the writers kind of outdo themselves. Just talking about as though we, the audience, don't understand the concept of war profiteering and, selling weapons to both sides and why somebody who was in that business would want to keep the conflict going. Really, we need to spend time on that. We need to spend time being told, okay, now it's time. We're going to show them the Banshee and scare them to death. It was just a little, it really got too much for me, basically, in this one. More so than it has been in most other episodes. This was quite bad. I'd also say, just in terms of kind of bring it all together about why this is just not a good episode. I'm pretty sure you know what I'm going to say because you've heard me say it a lot of times before. This, in terms of the structure of the episode, is very, very cookie cutter. It reminds me a lot of episodes from the original series in season 7 in terms of the plot, where we're going after villains who are not the sharpest knives in the drawer by any means. And there's less than 0 difficulty for the IMF in this one, if that's even possible. If difficulty could be measured with a negative number, I would say that this episode qualifies. These guys are literally just led down the garden path by the IMF, 0 difficulty or less than 0. There's no plot holes, is something that I was going to say, and I was going to point that out as a positive. But I was going to say that the story is cogent, for what it is. Even though it's hokey, it does make sense. But I don't really know that that's a positive, because when I thought about it, I said to myself, wait, that's because everything is so contrived. Everything is made so convenient for the plot to just kind of go through these steps. So yeah, okay, there's no plot holes, but that's because the story is so simplistic and bare. So, yeah, fine, okay, you don't have any holes in it, but there's really not much substance. There's not even space for a hole, frankly. The biggest the biggest such thing I would point out as an example would be, yet again, an interlude with Grant. Just like we had in the previous episode, The Führer's Children, there was kind of a bit of what turned out to be kind of a useless sequence where Grant is kind of captured and put at some risk. Here, again, it happens after the staged fight and whatnot. And I get why they did that part of it. They had to buy some time for Nicholas and Shannon so that they could kind of gaslight, the weapons and the pub and all of that sort of thing. And then later on, they staged a conversation. I don't really know why they had to do that, why they had to set Grant up as like a weapons expert or a mercenary or something like that. Maybe kind of to sell the effect of Jim and Max actually being the real deal in terms of arms dealers for McCarran's benefit. I don't know, it just seemed kind of weird to me. And then, of course, the plan would be Grant is going to leave and say, I don't want any part of this. Max heads away with him to make sure that he, quote unquote, stays quiet. But the IMF didn't count on McCarran sending O'Rourke after him. And that becomes a little bit of a wild card and makes some kind of fake tension. This was really, really, really forced. I obviously had the O'Rourke thing not happened, Max and Grant would probably have just gone away and got to the lighthouse scot-free or whatever. Maybe they would have like heard a gunshot may have been heard just for effect or whatever. I don't know. It just I hope what I'm trying to say is at least a little bit clear in terms of the way that was just all kind of set up, because there was just so little in this episode in terms of the meat of the episode. I've already talked about the villains and their lame schmuckery, making them superstitious, kind of like they did a few episodes ago with General Zabos in War Games. It almost seems unnecessary and over the top. These guys are lame schmucks even without the superstitious part of it. I guess that's just an added thing just to give the episode a little bit of flavor, I guess. And again, just another sign that it's there's not really a whole heck of a lot to this plot. It is what it is. It was what it was for after you watch it and you're like, okay, that happened. On to the next one. At least that's how I. In terms of callbacks, just to kind of wrap this one up, and this is going to be a shorter review than most, I think. I thought about the episode from season 4 in the original series called Phantoms for the imagery. The way that Shannon looks as the Banshee is very similar to how Antoinette Bauer, the female agent in that episode, looked as kind of like a ghost from, the villain's past. I also think that there could be a callback here to the episode The Killing from season 2, although this is nowhere near as good as that episode was. In that one, the IMF basically spins a very kind of supernatural story to kind of entrap a villain into believing that, something really weird is going on. So when all of these supernatural effects happen, he completely buys into it. Now, in this one, we've got lame schmucks as villains. In that episode, The Killing, we didn't have a lame schmuck. So the IMF had to work much harder in order to get him to buy into the effects of it. But again, the whole idea of it, the premise of it, is to establish this kind of supernatural happening in order to sell the effect and to trap the villain in the end. In this one, we have it that the villain has an engineered public confession in order to accomplish the mission. In that one, he actually commits a murder to get him sent away so that the IMF can get evidence on him. A little bit different, but in many ways kind of the same. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say about this one. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps me a lot with the algorithms, the likes and subscribes. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. And I'll see you next time.